Welcome to Chain Reaction by AduroMark. In today's video we are going to be walking you through the process of filling your engraving with powder paint. This paint is usually used for powder coating metal, so you may already be familiar with the product if you've done tumblers with a powder coating on your laser. Except unlike powder coated tumblers where the laser is removing the paint, we are going to be filling the engraving using our laser. There are other tutorials online for this process, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. We are just sharing our method and encourage you to check out the other tutorials on YouTube. Try all of the methods and decide which one works best for you. We first discovered this method thanks to Laser Engraving 911's tutorial, so be sure to check out his process because it's a solid walkthrough as well. We start with placing a couple of pieces of cut-off material in our engraving bed that is roughly the thickness of the material we are going to be engraving. These pieces will act as a jig, which will ensure that the piece we are working with will be in the exact same place after being removed from the laser. Why we want this level of accuracy will be made painfully obvious later in the video, and we'll include an example of what happens when you don't have your piece properly placed. Next, you're going to want to engrave your piece a little deeper than you're accustomed to. While we chose a piece of pre-finished cabinet-grade birch plywood for this project, you can use this method for acrylic and other types of media as well. Just remember you'll need at least a ½ millimeter of depth for the paint to stick properly. If you decide to use soft woods, results will vary, so plan on doing some heavy testing before utilizing this process. While the engraving is finishing, let's talk about how the process works and the different kinds of powder coating paint available. Traditional powder coating adheres the paint to the substrate by using an electrical charge to ionize the surface of the metal substrate, which causes the paint to stick to the surface of the piece and instantly melt to it. Then the piece is cured under controlled heat for the amount of time directed by the paint manufacturer. Using a laser for our process is a little different in that the substrate, in this case wood, isn't electrically conductive. Thus the powder needs a thermal reaction to activate. This thermal reaction is provided by the laser. It's possible to use this process with both diode and CO2 lasers, but while the process is effectively the same in that both laser types require an initial pass for engraving, a paint filling, and finally a second pass under the laser to activate the paint, the settings will be drastically different between the two machine types. Keep in mind that when baking your paint into your engraving, you are only going to get one bite at the apple. If you try to go over the paint repeatedly with the laser, it will overcook the paint and make it brittle, causing the paint to fall out of the engraving. There are many powder paint options, but in our testing we have found that prismatic powder works best, and we strongly recommend this brand as the powder is well formulated, comes in an extensively large variety of colors, and for just a couple dollars more than the bargain options, Prismatic will provide you with a pound of powder paint, making them the best value for both quality and quantity. Some will tell you to salvage your excess powder from both the fill step as well as the post-engraving step. We don't recommend this. The risk of contaminants ending up in your powder is too high and the amount of powder saved is nominal. If you've thoroughly cleaned the surface of your piece prior to applying the powder, you can salvage the excess from the application step. But again, we do not recommend salvaging the powder from the second pass. Now let's talk about what you are going to need to fill your engraving. You're going to need a container to store your paint powder, the powder itself, and a spreading tool. For larger area jobs we use a drywall knife and Bondo spreaders for smaller jobs. We'll be using the Bondo spreader for this piece. We place a liberal amount of powder on one end of the engraved surface and use our spreading tool to move the paint into the engraved area. You will find that this process is most effective if you move relatively quickly with your strokes and use the tapered side of the scraper facing the material you are filling. Once your engraving is filled, you can use the tool to return any excess paint to your container. The manufacturer recommends using gloves and breathing protection while handling the powder paint, but clearly our technician doesn't read material handling manuals. Once you've completed this step, hopefully as Prismatic recommends with proper safety measures advised, you'll be ready to place your piece back into the engraver. Just make sure you take care to place the piece back in the engraver exactly as you had it when you did your first pass. You'll see why that is so important in just a moment. As you can see in here, our technician missed a few spots. Unlike liquid paints, powder paint doesn't self-level when it is hit with the laser, so be sure to double check your fill and make sure you have adequately filled all areas that you want to color fill. You won't get a second chance. If you've enjoyed the video so far or found it informative, please give it a like or a thumbs up and share it with other laser operators. And if you are in the business, please join us in the Laser Lounge on Facebook, where you will find lots more useful information. Now you will want to place your piece back in your engraving bed and reduce your power while increasing your speed, taking care to turn off your air assist before returning the piece to the machine. At this point you're going to see why our technician doesn't get paid very well. he makes lots of mistakes. In this case, he wasn't careful enough and placed the piece back in the engraving bed in a slightly different position than it started. The results are a shadow from the residual paint powder dust and a slightly unfinished section of the engraving, as well as a slight shadow on the wood itself. This is why placement is so important. Our less than attentive technician will remove the subject and repeat the process for the next section of the piece to be done in red, repeating the same process used to fill the top section with blue powder paint. For this demonstration we used prismatic lollipop red and intense blue. It should be noted that all powder coat colors will render slightly darker than they would had they been applied using the traditional method. For this reason we recommend that you create your own swatches rather than relying on the swatches provided by Prismatic for the trueness of colors. Now, let's get that second part done, and done right this time. Good help is hard to find these days. At this point the machine is going back over the final section, and the results are beautiful. Once the piece has been allowed sufficient time to set, approximately 20 minutes following the engraving process's completion, you can use a soft bristle paint brush to clear away any excess powder that remains. Again, we recommend you don't follow our technician's bad example. Wear gloves and a mask. Also, when you are ready to seal the wood, for best results spray on 2 even and light coats of polyacrylic sealer if the piece will be used indoors. If the piece will be used outdoors, we recommend sealing with epoxy.